Welcome everyone to the call today. Very excited about having a new product launching into Agora. And we have Gary who's going to help do the introduction on this, but this is Instapay. Employees that want, what happens a lot of times is different companies lose their employees so they can't pay them fast enough, or, a lot happens, like it says there on the screen, a lot happens between pay periods. So with that being said, I would really like to get into this call. Looking forward to it. Gary, can you go ahead and do the introduction for the call?
Sure, Vince. Thanks, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Gary Liguori. The name of my company is Atlantic Cost Reduction. So what I try to do with my clients is help them save money, bring services that can reduce their costs and make them more efficient, and anything that we can do to help their business. In some cases, it's helping them. And in this case, you're going to see how we'll not only help the employer, but really help the employee as well. So this is kind of a program that's really going to benefit three parties that we're talking about today. So it's really going to help the employer. It's going to help their employees tremendously. And it's going to help all of us who can represent this service and product and not only make money from it, but get in front of more people for our other businesses so that we can present other services as well. So what you'll see here today is something that's very unique. There's really not much in terms of competition to this product. And joining us today is Greg Unruh, who works with me and works with Branch, and they are the providers, and Greg works closely with them in terms of providing information and sales and marketing for their team. So with that, I'll turn it over to Greg and let him take you through this presentation, and you'll see that like many of the services that we offer, this is a free service to the employer. So from that standpoint, it's you can't get a better benefit than that. So Greg, I'll turn it over to you and let you do your thing.
Yeah, thank you, Gary, and thank you, Vince, for having me today. We'll start off, and I'll just kind of give you an overview of how this is going to flow. I like to start off and kind of talk about the different personas that we're going to be discussing. So the first one I start off with is really kind of dialing in on that employee persona. Why is this important? What makes this a great benefit? Why is this gaining so much momentum and really becoming very mainstream? The employee is certainly a big factor of that, but then we'll move into the employer side. What is the benefit to the employer? And in a tight labor market and where we are from an economic perspective as a whole, there's a significant challenge around attracting and retaining talent, and this has a significant impact to it. We'll go through some numbers, some statistics, and then we'll get into the product, and I'll walk you through the product, and then we'll kind of do a wrap up. So if we want to go ahead and get started, as this first slide represents, life happens between pay periods. This is the life of the employee, the hourly worker. And, I think it's important we cover this because it's probably been 30 years since I've been in the hourly workforce, and sometimes out of sight, out of mind, we forget what maybe that's like for that hourly worker, where life happens, and oftentimes it's in a reactionary way. And we do know that they may be living, in fact, we're certain that the vast majority live kind of this cash flow, paycheck to paycheck life cycle, and so anytime there's a disruption in that, it can be problematic. If you go ahead and scroll down, Vince, we'll move to the next slide. So I think there's some interesting information on here, and we're going to dial in on this a little bit, but I put this on here as kind of a bold statement. Would it surprise you that your employees are coming to work hungry? Now, literally, maybe not, but more philosophically, and you'll see why this is on some of the data points I'm going to put up here. But when we surveyed our base of clients that are using the same-day pay application or feature, I think it was almost 60%. It'll come up on a slide here in a moment. Take that advance out for food and groceries, which is really shocking, that between pay periods they don't have enough food either for themselves or their family, and they come up short between pay periods, and they need to get to the grocery store, and then as other things come up between pay periods, I think it was transportation, personal emergency, those sorts of things. So this is a big deal for the hourly worker, and as Forbes states, 78% of all workers live paycheck to paycheck. So we are giving them a viable option, and let's move to the next slide, and we'll kind of talk a little more. So the viable option is really kind of goes back to, and I know I'm probably oversimplifying this, but it's life. Life happens, and when they do come up short between pay period, the typical path or options they have available to them, none of them are good. Most of them are, sadly, I shouldn't say most, but a good many, when they're short on funds and they're in an emergency, they're in a crisis, they might be drawn to go to one of these predatory lending outfits, payday loan, title loan, or they might find themselves, a lot of people don't think about it, the banks position overdraft protection as a benefit, but if you do the math and you look at the statistics and the numbers behind overdrafts, it's very predatory as well. So we try to give them, through this tool, an option to avoid all of those things. These are all things that, typically when they need a financial bump between pay periods, it's short term. They don't need to get into a long-term punitive situation at 300-400% interest. They don't need to be taking or drawing off their retirement savings or 401k, although that's available to them. It has long-term consequences, usually to solve what, in many cases, is just a short-term kind of cash flow bump that they need to get over between pay periods. So this is a really good way of doing that. The other thing, let's go ahead and move to the next slide, if you will. So before I move on, these are just a couple obvious statements. What does life look like between pay periods for many folks? I'm out of gas and I'm out of money to get to work. I mean, payday might be on Friday, and here it is Tuesday, and I'm running short on funds. What options does that person have? We don't want them to go down one of these other paths to solve something that is very short term, very temporary. They're just trying to get through for the next couple days. They don't need to go to one of these payday loan outfits and do that. When they can solve that problem or that challenge at the low cost of basically an ATM fee. No interest, no other fees. It's just basically an ATM fee. For $3.99, they can get a little bump against their earned wages. It's already coming. They know it's coming. It's coming in their paycheck. It's just a timing issue. I have no money and no food in the fridge. My kids are sick, and I have no money to cover a doctor's visit to pay for medicine. These seem like they might be bold statements, but they're really, this is real. This is real life. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So this is what I was talking about on some of the statistics. Workers don't jump from one employer to the next because they're greedy. It's because of life. And like I said, it was almost 67% will take an advance out on their pay between pay periods to cover food and groceries. And then you can see the other stats here. I won't go through all of these, but personal emergency, transportation. What's common with all of these is these are reactionary. These are unplanned events that just happen. It's life. Now, I don't think anyone's naive enough to think that, maybe there's not some of the just maybe poor financial management with managing their funds. So we provide some tools, and we'll get into that in a little bit, from budgeting and cash flow management, helping them be better stewards of their money and financial wellness. Because I am certain that there's probably some that it's not a personal emergency or lack of food in the fridge. It might be that there's a Garth Brooks concert this weekend, and payday is Friday, and they need to get their tickets today. And so I have no doubt in my mind there's some of that going on too. That's not really the intended purpose of this. We really work with the employers to make this a true benefit and something that is voluntary. It's there if they need it, but if they don't need it, don't use it. But we do want to give them tools to be better stewards of their money and promote financial wellness. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So this next slide is where I'm going to kind of shift over to some of the benefits and the outcomes for the employer. And so, addressing life for the employee drives results for the employer. And statistically, and we'll get into some of this, but we certainly see a reduction in turnover, reduction in absenteeism. We also see that when this is promoted in your hiring and recruiting campaigns, kind of those outbound efforts, we see on average about a 60% increase in your job applicants for that position. That's a big deal when you're in a really tight labor market, 3.6 unemployment right now. People are scratching and scraping for those those skilled workers. So anytime you can expand that labor pool, that's a big needle mover. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide, if you will. So just to dial in a little deeper on that, I titled this slide as the perfect storm. And here we are at 3.6% unemployment. We know within the hourly workforce that there is a statistically 100% turnover, annual turnover. Now, in some industries, it's actually much higher than that. It's 100% quarter over quarter, which makes that close to 300-400%. And a lot of that's attributed to seasonal hiring and things that you expect in that turnover. But the real thing that we want to look at is the cost of that turnover. The average cost, and this is kind of a median value. I think on my next slide in fact, let's go ahead and move to the next slide, and I'll cover both of these. So the median value cost of replacing one employee is about $3,200. We see a decrease in turnover by about 13% for those companies that we've introduced same-day pay as a benefit. And that $3,200, I'm not sure if it's at the bottom of this slide, but I have the sources. This is pulled from a variety of third-party HR sources, and you have this available to you to click on those and look at where we arrived at these numbers. These aren't made-up numbers. These are real numbers from valid sources. I've seen this, it's kind of a range between, I've seen as low as maybe $2,500 to as high as $7,000. So kind of that midpoint value is about $3,200. We have an impact of reducing that turnover by about 13%. This actually caught me by surprise. I wasn't sure that, I wasn't aware that this cost of absenteeism was so high. But per employee cost of absenteeism is about $3,600 as the median value. Now we have an ability to decrease that statistically by about 10%. And what that is where you've got a shift scheduled and the employee doesn't show up, or the shift coverage is low, and those sorts of things. And so the impact of that is very, very costly. Now, I like to look at things and put it in a quantitative way. And so, I look at for every 1,000 hourly workers, if we have a reduction in turnover by 13%, well, that's 130 workers. And if you have another impact of 10%, that's another 100 workers per every 1,000. You aggregate those numbers, put them together. That comes up to about $750,000 in cost savings just by reducing turnover, absenteeism, and I haven't even factored in these numbers the impact of expanding your labor pool and increasing your job applicants by an average of 60%. So there's a huge cost savings, and I think the big needle mover on this, when you think about it, is this is a benefit that has zero cost to the employer. The employer does not fund or subsidize any of the advances. Branch funds the entire advance. So it's really zero risk to the employer. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So it's zero risk to the employer. They have significant benefit to the employee. But here's the thing about the employee, and this is the challenge for any HR person that's responsible for hiring and retaining talent, is the cost of loyalty is very low. We know this. We see it all the time. We have lots of customer testimonials that will speak to this. I'm sure you'll be familiar with this. That an employee making $8 an hour or $10 an hour, if they can make $8.25 across the street doing the same job, or $10.25 across the street doing the same job, they'll jump and move jobs for 25 cents. I've actually seen it lower. I've seen people move for a dime. It's really pretty unbelievable that the cost of loyalty for an organization is that low. The other side of that is, as this becomes more mainstream, this is becoming a really big consideration as far as attracting and retaining that talent. That if you're not offering access, same-day access to your wages or a percentage of, then and you're in a competitor or a company across the street for that same skilled position you're at risk of losing that employee, because kind of going back to the value points of the employee, life happens between pay periods. That knowing that there's tight money management, tight cash flow, living paycheck to paycheck. This idea of being able to get access to my earned wages instantly without having to wait that full 2-week pay cycle, that's very, very attractive. And all things being equal, and that same skill across the street, you may lose that employee to somebody offering this benefit. And on the flip side of that, if you're out there, hustling for talent and trying to get the best talent to come to your organization, offering this benefit puts you at a competitive advantage. So it's a win-win for everybody. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So this is kind of the cliffhanger. This is how we like to position this, and there's a couple of really good reasons behind it. So our approach to taking this product to market is in a B2B approach, and so we work directly with employers, and it's through the employers is how we engage the employees. Now that approach it's very unique. And it actually allows us to be compliant in all 50 states because we're not in a B2C model. We're not engaging those employees and providing this financial service or this benefit to the employee directly. If we're doing that directly, then you kind of get into some of the other truth in lending, and you become almost more like a traditional loan type deal, although it's not a loan. It's really, in this case, it's just an advance on already earned wages. So we do position this as a company-sponsored third-party employee benefit program. I put this in the same bucket as any other benefit that you may offer as an employer. If it's health care. Now the difference is on health coverage and some of the other benefits, you as the employer are probably subsidizing some of that cost. In the case of same-day pay, you don't subsidize anything. You are not responsible for any of the advances. That's 100% on branch. And if there's any defaults, which we know there will be, we built that into our financial modeling, the employer is also not responsible for that. That is all absorbed by branch, and so that's built into our financial modeling. So this is truly zero cost, zero risk, significant return and benefit to the employer by moving the needle on these metrics around HR and retention and turnover and absenteeism, increasing your job applicant pool. Tremendous benefit, but probably more importantly is you're creating happy employees. You're giving tools to the employees that are going to be very, very helpful. This is a safety net. This is something they need. But in addition to this, we also give them some budget and some planning tools. We give them some corporate communications, allowing you the ability to leverage this app to push communications down to those hourly workers. There is sometimes a disconnect in that. I'll get into more of that here in a moment. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So I'd like to talk about this before we get into the product, which I'm transitioning to that here in a moment. I think it's important. I think this is validation by association. We have a lot of brands that have put their trust in branch. And so just by example, and if you want to go to the next slide, this will show some of the brands that are clients of branch. Now, I want to be clear on this. There's some pretty big logos on here and a lot of big companies. These aren't necessarily corporate or enterprise relationships. Many of these are probably franchise groups, pockets or franchisors that in a geographic region or location. Best example I could give you that comes to mind is up here in the upper right. You got Taco Bell up there. Well, we don't have a corporate relationship yet. If you guys can open the door and get us one, we'd love to get in with Yum Brands and some of the others that are the parents to some of these. But what the Taco Bell, that logo represents is we have, I think, two of their top franchisor groups or franchisee groups. Border Foods, by example, is a client of ours. It's the largest Taco Bell franchise group, ownership group. And so we have, thousands of employees and locations on that. So that's where you see Taco Bell. But, I can tell you that, Target up there in the top line in the middle, now they're an enterprise customer branch. They use us in the retail operations, call center, distribution and fulfillment centers. Now they primarily use us, we kind of cut our teeth in the scheduling, workforce management side, and then we layered on and added this ability to offer same-day pay. And that really took hold. So some of these are existing clients from our mobile-first scheduling platform. I'll talk a little bit about that here in a moment. But what we found is the adoption and the interest in the same-day pay has become so great that some of our existing clients rolling that out, the same-day pay, very easy. It's just another added benefit to the app they already have. But we've got a lot of new clients on here that like Dollar General and a number of other ones that we led with same-day pay just because it was a great lead-in, no cost, no budgetary concerns or consideration. So it allowed us to get our foot in the door, and then we'll turn around at some point and probably introduce some of the other benefits that we can turn on or off very easily within the application. But anyway, I just wanted to put up on the board some logos to give you some confidence in the company we keep from a client perspective. But we can go ahead and move to the next slide. So this is moving into the product side of it. And so in the free application, no cost, as we said, no cost to the employer. You're going to probably hear me say that a few times. But also, there's no cost or fee to the employee. They're not paying for the app or any of that. The only thing that the employee pays for is if they choose or if they need and take out an advance, they go into the app. The only thing that the employee is going to get charged is a one-time, basically, ATM fee. $3.99, that's it. There's no additional fees or not a loan attached to it or any of those sorts of things. So it's really a win-win for everybody. So this kind of working left to right. Access, this is all in one app. So this is one app with these multiple features that are included or baked into the app. Access is the instant access to earned wages or same-day pay. Budget is a financial wellness and budgeting tool, and then Grow is that corporate communications tool that allows the employer to communicate with that hourly workforce. And actually, I think this is one of the most powerful parts of this and benefits to the employer, because engaging that hourly workforce can be oftentimes a challenge. You have to have their, hopefully you have they're probably not on your corporate communications roster, so they probably don't have a corporate email. You may or may not have their home or cell phone number or whatever it is, but if they have the app on their phone, this is a great way to engage, push information down, those sorts of things. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide, and I'll kind of dial in on each one of these and give you a visual to it. So access, same-day pay. You can see very user-friendly interface. So on the instant access to earned wages, these are wages that are already earned by the employee. So, and we'll talk about that process here in a couple more slides. But what we won't do is we're not going to give the employee the opportunity to advance 100% of their wages, because what we don't want to have happen is come payday that they've taken out one or more advances and burned up their entire paycheck, and so on payday there's nothing left. We don't want to allow that. That's not promoting good fiscal or financial awareness. So what we do is we cap that at 50%, but of their earned wages. But we do allow the employer to tighten those screws a little bit. If they want to lower that, or if they want to limit the number of transactions per month, they can do that. But by default, we limit that to they can advance up to 50% of their already earned wages. And now we get those earned wages, we confirm or validate that through a daily timesheet or time and attendance feed that we get, and I'll explain how that works here in just a moment. But let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So the other part of this tool is the budget. And so this is kind of what I would, if you're familiar with Quicken or Mint or any of these kind of online budgeting tools or mobile budgeting tools, this is kind of a similar type of approach, but it's very clear, very easy to use. It's linked to their bank account so they can see what their cash flow is. They can see when their next payday is. They can kind of see where, how their cash flow is going and any upcoming bills or transactions are going to happen on this pay period. And we give them a little meter up there at the top that says, hey, listen, you've got this much money in the bank. Your payday is 5 days away. Based on the bills that you have scheduled coming in, you're in a potential overdraft situation if you have anything that comes up that could bump you over. Well, those overdrafts can be $30, $35 a pop, and they usually kind of snowball. And so it's not $30 or $35. It might end up being $100, $150, $200. Whereas through the budgeting tool, you kind of get a proactive look at that, and you can go out and take a loan, or I shouldn't say a loan, I should say an advance on your paycheck. You've already earned the wages. You're just a few days away from payday or a week away. For $4 or $3.99, that's a heck of a lot cheaper to go out and take an advance, put $50 in your account, and that money, when you request that advance, that lands in that employee's checking account instantly. And you'll see how they do that in just a moment through their linked debit card or payroll card. But it's a very powerful tool to help avoid some of these overdraft situations, but also they can, kind of hopefully become better stewards of their money, see where it's going, see how it's flowing. We don't want them to abuse it. That's why we put the limit of 50% of your earned wages and not 100%. But we also want to give them some budgeting tools. And so let's go ahead and move to the next slide. And this is the corporate communications. I already talked about it, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but this is just a means for the employer to push down corporate communications to that hourly worker. It might be company or career resources or information, job opportunities. It might be maybe you're a philanthropic type of organization, and hey, we're looking for volunteers this weekend to go support a cause that the company is passionate about. Well, what a way to engage or reach that hourly workforce. So maybe it's just giving somebody a pat on the back, hey, great job, and kind of giving those attaboys, if you will. So some really good, that's a really great feature, I think, in the app that sometimes is overlooked just because of how brightly the same-day pay shines. But this is a really powerful feature of the app I certainly want to make sure we touch on. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll kind of get into some of the setup and how things move. So the employee setup is really easy. They basically download the app, and we'll talk about kind of how this connects and how we verify as we get to the employer setup. But the employee setup, they're going to get a link. They're going to be able to download the app from the Android or the iTunes app store. They'll create their profile. Having worked with the employer, we're already going to be able to link that employee up to the information that the employer's provided us. So they create their profile, and then if you move to the next step, next slide, excuse me. Part of the next step is they're going to link their Visa check card to their bank account. This works very similarly if you're familiar with like a PayPal or a Venmo, any of these personal financial kind of mobile apps that are on the market for the individual. We use actually the same underlying technology and platform for the linking and verification of this banking information. We've gone through rigorous pen testing. If you're not familiar with that, it's penetration testing. We're one of the few that does. It's actually a very costly endeavor to go through, but it's very necessary because we're dealing with financial information. So we've done all of the due diligence from a compliance and security and all those sorts of things. So in effect, what the employee does is they go ahead and link their debit card, and this is the means in which branch will push those advances to the employee. Through this card, they land instantly in the employee's linked checking account, so in 60 seconds or less, that money is available for them to use. And then and that's really all there is for the employee. Not much more to explain on that. It's very, very straightforward. And now if we go to the next slide, we'll get into some of the employer setup. So what do we ask of the employer? It's really low touch. So when you look at the employer, we just need a few bits of information. Number one, we need to know, where do your employees work? What are the locations? What are the corporate locations? Where do they work? Can you provide a directory or roster? We need their names, first name, last name, just basic identification information, because we want to link that up, particularly when we're, that's part of the matching process, if you will, for the employee setup when they create their profile. That we want to make sure that they square up and match up to as a valid employee that is validated through the employer. And then we work with the employer, and this is really a very simple process. We've done this thousands of times actually, but we work with the employer to configure a daily export, just kind of an automated kind of set it and forget it process, to send over the daily timesheet information for those employees. And what that does is it's basically the clock in, clock out, and that's our verification. Branch is carrying 100% of the risk. We're making the advance. We want to make sure that that employee worked the hours that they were supposed to work and where they were supposed to work them. And that's typically found in the time and attendance file. And so we'll work with them. That's usually in the payroll system. It's a very easy process for us to either configure or put a little script in that automatically sends that to us as a flat file, over a secured FTP site or an email. And that, most often, you configure that for like a midnight batch run or something like that. But it's very, very easy. It's not, don't want to overcomplicate it. It's a pretty simple configuration. And usually in that time and attendance, we can get the hourly wage as well. We don't need it daily, but we do need initially to get that hourly wage of the employee. You're going to have a mix of employees that, some may make $8 an hour, some may make $15 an hour. That's going to determine what their eligibility is or how much of an advance they can take based on their hours worked and their wage. So those are really the four things that we need from the employer. After that, it really becomes a matter of communication and engagement and pushing this through the down to the employee base, and then baking this into your new employee onboarding process is yet another benefit. So very, very easy to set up for the employee as well as for the employer. And as you'll see here, there's no integration to payroll. We don't require an integration to payroll. When we have that time and attendance, that's not an integration. That's more of a configuration where you're just going to do an export and send that flat file back to us. Now, the other thing, and I don't think I have a slide on this. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. Actually, go to the next slide. I think I may have put this in here. I did, actually. So how it works. I forgot I added this in here. So, how does Branch get the money back? So what we do when we go through the initial setup is we work with the employer to understand what their pay cycle is, what their process is, and what we'll do is we'll send a payroll deduction file to that employer that kind of lines up when they do their normal payroll processing. So a couple days ahead of time, they're going to get that payroll file. They're going to see that deduction file from Branch. They're going to see that, well, that employee, we need to process this deduction. They took out a $100 advance, so we're going to deduct $100 or $103.99 because we're going to get our fee back plus the $100 we advanced. And then on payday, that employee is going to receive their net deposit that lands in their checking account or on their pay card, just as they would normally. But they'll see a line item for that deduction for the advance that they took. And in the app, they have a full history of every transaction, so they can always see the advances they've taken and see the history of that. So the flow of funds and how it works is really easy. And so once the payroll deduction file has been processed, then that's backed out of the employee's net pay or out of the pay, and then the company just will send that back to Branch as an ACH transaction typically. So very easy to process, just part of the normal payroll process. We went through a couple iterations and looked at a couple different ways of identifying what was most acceptable from an accounting and payroll perspective, and this hands down is the preferred way. So this is how we do it, and it's very, very low touch and very easy to manage. And keep in mind, it's only for those that actually take out the advance. Again, this is a voluntary benefit. if you have 1,000 employees, it doesn't mean that 1,000 all 100% of those are going to be taken out in advance. It's going to be a subset of those that they're going to do that, and they can take out they can never take out more than 50% of their earned wages in that pay period. But if they need $50 this week and maybe $100 the next week, they can take out multiple transactions. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm just about on the wrap up here, folks. Just a couple things to touch on. This is just kind of an overview. We've got the premium subscriptions and our free. This is all built into the single branch app. What you get out of the box, no cost, free to the employer, free to the employee as the asset budget grow. Now, if the employer has a need to incorporate some mobile scheduling capabilities, shift swapping, those type of things, or get have better insights into kind of the data analytics behind these services, then those are premium services. Those are basically monthly SaaS fee. I think it's like $1 per month per user per module. So Earn and Insights are kind of licensed in that way. Don't hold me to that dollar amount. I believe it's that, but it's moved a little bit. But it's a low cost monthly SaaS fee. But let's go to the next slide, and I'll just talk about those two premium features. Just wouldn't do the app service if I didn't at least touch on these, although that's not our focus. These are completely optional, and typically branch will go in 60, 90 days after we've got them on same-day pay and ask them, hey, is this of interest? It's already built into the app. We can turn this on very easily for you. This allows your employees to swap shifts with one another. They can see dollars on shifts, so they can see how much a shift is worth. This helps improve shift coverage, reduce turnover, and it just pads some of the things that we already achieve with the same-day pay. It just amplifies that. So very, very powerful scheduling tool that actually works with many of the core scheduling systems like a Chronos or an ADP or some of the others that they may have. But it gives a very powerful mobile interface to that. So let's go to the next slide. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because it's not our focus, but I did want to touch on it. And then the other side was offering this Insights tool, which is just giving better insight and data to how are your employees using the application, and how many average transactions, what's the average rate of turnover, and what's the impact. And you can get all those data points to kind of keep your finger on the pulse of how this is impacting your operations from a data perspective. So it's some powerful information, the value's in the data. But anyway, let's go to the next slide. Just a couple case studies, and I'll go through these really quickly. Kind of going back to that Border Foods, Taco Bell, we had, which was really high, an 89% mobile adoption. Now, that doesn't mean that we had 89% using same-day pay. That means that we had 89% of all their employees actually downloaded, configured installed the app, configured the profile, and then we had a subset of those, I think it's around 40 or so percent maybe, were actually using the same-day pay. But what was interesting is statistically, for those that were using the same-day pay feature, they were doing it 4.1 times a month. We're actually seeing that number slide up to closer to 5 times a month now. So it's really interesting when you start looking at the impact. But I think what was really, well, the other stat down here, not to overlook it, is we had a 60% increase in shift coverage when we introduced this to the organization. The other thing that, and I touched on this earlier in one of my early comments, but we did a kind of a bake-off on a hiring and recruiting campaign with the Borders, and they did a campaign with instant pay or same-day pay, and they did one without. And in their results on that, they had a 2.5x increase in job applicants on the one that mentioned or referenced same-day pay as a benefit versus the one that didn't. With everything else being all equal and the same, that's a huge impact, and that was much greater than the average 60% that we see. That's about a 250% increase. So huge benefit to their organization. And so, their pain point was turnover, and we addressed that directly, and they're extremely happy. Let's go on to the next one, and this will be just kind of wrapping it up here. Come and Go, C-store chain. They got about 400 locations or so. I think around 11, 12 maybe 13,000 employees overall. I can't remember for sure, but their big pain point was, certainly around turnover, retaining and hiring, all the same HR metrics that are concerned to everybody. But their big pain point is they actually had their general managers in these store locations having to cover shifts for the hourly workers that were either skipping out, so kind of back to that absenteeism. The cost of that and putting a higher salaried or higher compensated general manager having to do the kind of entry-level shift coverage for that was extremely costly to the organization. And so a couple things that, when we rolled this out, and now they rolled out not just same-day pay. They did the whole thing. So they had the scheduling, the same-day pay. We actually have a much more comprehensive case study on this that happy to share with you separately. We'll maybe do that in center. Reduced turnover by 25%, reduction in overtime by 25%, 10% reduction in turnover, and then I don't see it on my screen, but that's a 70% reduction in general managers on the shift coverage. So let's go to the next slide because I know we're bumping in on time here, so I want to kind of wrap it up. Just a quick overview. Benefits should be pretty obvious at this point. Low friction, easy to deploy, easy for the employee to use and download on their smartphone. It's compliant and it's reliable. They see their funds as in almost instantly, less than 60 seconds. When they take that advance on those earned wages, it lands in their banking account, and they can have access to that instantly. And by the way, I say banking account. If the employee doesn't have, they're unbanked and they use a pay card, we certainly support those as well. So you can link that pay card to the app just like you can a checking account or debit card. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. This is just kind of what the rollout looks like, and this is kind of the wrap-up slide here. So for a company to get started, it's a one-page enrollment form, and like I said, there's no cost, so you're not selling anything really. You're just really explaining the benefit of a program as a corporate-sponsored third-party benefit program. And when that client or that prospect initially says, "Let's do it," you have a kickoff call. That first week is really about collecting the employer information, the directory, the roster. We'll get their time and attendance configuration set up for them and work with them on that side of it. And then week 2 is all about communication and engagement, pushing out marketing materials, working with a point of contact with the company that how to present this or how to make it available to the employees, because at the end of the day, we want to get that app adoption. We want to get them to download the app, and then once they have the app on their system, and a big push for that for the employer is that corporate communications piece. Real benefit to that. But the pull-through on that is, all the employees have it in their hands, 85% or more. That allows them access to the same day pay or instant access to earned wages. So in 2 weeks or less, they could be fully deployed, up and going, and a very, very straightforward and easy process. And I think that might be my last slide. I think the other one is just kind of a wrap up, Vince and Gary. So that sums up my presentation today. Hopefully I covered most of the bases. If there's questions, Vince or Gary, happy to spend a few minutes talking about those, or we can just make those available offline and provide some further information if there's further questions.
Yeah, this is very impressive. I know in the day and age we live, and you're just so true. A lot of people, they don't need a lot of money. They just need a little bit to cover them. But then when they get in a situation, they have to go borrow from a source. That puts them in a bind. That ends up costing them tons. So by having access to just some of the money really is a game changer. So this is a wonderful option to have here in Agora. We work really hard at bringing business solutions, and we have some of the best business solutions. This is just a great suite. Like I said, I've already got someone in mind I was telling you about.